Okay, recording. Right. Dear friends, listeners, wherever you are, I hope this finds you well and in good health. And if not, I'm hoping that it might lift your spirits and brighten your day a little bit, or night, wherever you may be in the world. So, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Today, I have a very special guest with me, my dear colleague, Cyrus Zargar. Um, Cyrus is an endowed Al Ghazali Distinguished Professor in Islamic Studies who earned his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, in Near Eastern Studies in 2008. Dr. Zargar's research interests include classical Sufism, Islamic philosophy, Arabic and Persian Sufi literature, and ethics in literature and film. Really, I offer a very short introduction because he is so well known across Sufi studies in the field of Islamic studies. He is a foremost expert on Sufism. It is an absolute pleasure and delight to have him here with us today. Um, Cyrus, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Milad. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. It's so nice to see you. It's so nice to finally be able to speak with you. And thank you so
Likewise.
much for making the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Cyrus, if I may, let me begin in a roundabout way with my first question,
Okay.
and hopefully we can enter into some discussions. Um, for a long time, I've had this quote on my office wall, and it's from, I believe it's attributed to Hafez, and I've had it for ages, and I'm not even sure, to be honest with you, how it got on my wall. Memory fails. Um, at some point, I must have thought this is really cool, and I wrote it up and put it up on there. But it goes something like this in English. The subject for tonight is love, and for tomorrow night as well. I'm sure everyone's heard this. It's probably all over the place. So I don't have the exact details on it, but it's something I've sort of put up there and I always look at, and I enjoy that very much. But it's fitting for the subject of our discussion now, today, and tonight, um, because it's the topic of your book, the very title, The Religion of Love, Sufism and Self-Transformation in the Poetic Imagination of Attar, which was published by SUNY Press. Um, a fine achievement, and indeed, my congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, I have read it from start to finish, so I really enjoyed reading it.
Thank you.
I have to say, and this is no, I'm not trying to embellish this in any way. I'm being absolutely frank. It's quite a lucidly written book, and in my opinion, it effortlessly presents a great deal of highly complex aspects of Sufism, as well as notoriously difficult to translate terminology and concepts, which is something that I really found accessible about your book. And these concepts and terminology that belong to the 12th, early 13th century Iran, um, and are related to our figure of conversation for today, especially Attar of Nishapur. Now, when I say this, I'm thinking about the period, I'm thinking about Nishapur, the place, Attar's context, um, and there is a historian. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work, Richard Bullitt from Columbia, um, and his work on Nishapur. Um, And I have in mind when I think about Nishapur, obviously I have the image that he sort of planted in my mind when he gave his lectures and when he wrote his books, and obviously his work on Nishapur. The text is called Patricians of Nishapur, which focuses on several families and how they sort of developed the place initially. But he sort of planted this idea in my mind about Nishapur as kind of an equivalent to Renaissance Florence. And these families, something along the lines of the Medici in Florence, who dominated and shaped the social, political, and cultural landscape in many ways. So before we turn to the subject of love, I wonder if you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of our listeners, saying a word or two about Sufism, perhaps contextualizing it for us a little bit, and Attar's place in that tradition, the tradition of Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam, if you like. But I'll over to you.
Well, these are some excellent points. And I should say, one of the amazing things about Professor Richard Bulliet is his generosity. So when I was working on some of the research about Nishapur, I noticed that he uh, he had something on his academia.edu page, um, a very useful article, but I couldn't figure out any publication information for it. And, he's retired. So I reached out to him and I said, Professor Bulliet, like, how do I cite this, that you've put on academia.edu page? And it turns out, as I discovered in his response, that that was the publication. He just wrote the article and gave it to the world for free
Wow.
through academia.edu. I
Wow.
was very impressed. I mean, that just shows, his commitment to just teaching and learning about Nishapur. I mean, yeah, he's a really great scholar. Okay, so there's so many good things to unpack there, from love to Sufism to Attar. Let's as you said, let's start with Sufism, which for Attar seems to have been like encapsulated the world as he knew it, the world of Islam as he knew it. Now, of course, he was aware of those who were not amenable to Sufism, those who had other views. He was aware of them, but you see in his writings that he's immersed in a sort of worldview, one wherein there's a legacy of sainthood and pious practice that goes all the way back to Muhammad, right? Through the living saints, to the saints that were alive in their time, and then to the saints that are alive in his time, um, and that it was a way. He calls it like a rah, or sometimes tariqat. There
Mm.
was a way, sort of, that you could go back there, right? And so a big part of his work, as you know, is recounting that, telling us, look, these are the stories that matter. If you want to know this way of piety, these are the stories that matter. Stories about the prophet and his companions, but really a big part of it is stories of these saints. And so, of course, like, we could think of the Tazkiratul Awliya, the Memorial of Saints,
Yes.
which is his prose work, as a recounting of that. But actually, you'd be hard pressed to find any narrative piece, including his narrative poetry, that isn't centered around stories of people who are carrying on this tradition, right? His connection with the tradition is not completely known. There's been, I mean, some have surmised, as I say in the book, some have surmised the connection through to the Kobravi order.
Yes.
I mean, it's not well grounded. I mean, the similarities are there enough for someone to, I could see why they would think that. Um, there are a lot of similarities between him and Ainul Qazat Hamadani and the whole that line that goes back to Ahmad Ghazali,
Yes.
intellectually. And there's Jami's theory that perhaps Attar was initiated through an Owaisi connection via Hallaj, right?
Right.
All of these are possibilities. But what Attar himself tells us, and I think what really shines through in his work, is that this was a person who was immersed in reading,
Mm.
right? So, there have been other Sufi figures like this, like Saraj, for example, who for their engagement with Sufism was one that was primarily based in books. Even if they did encounter teachers and others, they were primarily readers. It's possible that that was Attar's connection to the Sufi tradition. So,
Mm. Okay. Fascinating. And thank you so much for that explanation and contextualization. It's really,
sure.
really critical and important. And as you say, it is all more or less spelled out in your book. So I highly recommend that um, people follow up on that and get the give further details on it. Um, so can I ask now about well, to love,
To love.
the
Yeah,
religion
your
of love.
quote.
Yeah. So what is it?
Yeah, yeah,
I
let's
mean,
think
there's a
about
lot
it.
of talk about religion of love, right?
Yeah, let's think about that. Yeah, that's a great place to start,
Okay.
right? With
Okay.
especially with the quote that you use. So, okay, um, there. First of all, there's the phrase mazhab ishq, right?
Yes.
Mazhab ishq would not be translated as religion of love, but it would be
Ah,
translated as sort of the domination or school of love.
yes.
Uh, Perhaps I think that's useful, but I think religion of love is a very useful phrase for a few reasons.
Hmm.
First of all, you can see Attar's interest in the principles and ways of being in what's called the Mazhab Eshq. That's one thing.
Yes.
The idea, the main core idea behind Mazhab Eshq is that falling in love is a transformative experience that is closer to knowing the real than any other human experience.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
That's the basic thing.
Okay.
And there is hidden in that an implication that sometimes comes out in Attar's writings, but comes out in all the time later in those who follow Attar. For example, in Hafez, the implication that falling in love is itself a religious experience and the purest of religious experiences, even if God is not involved,
Hmm.
right? Romeo and Juliet, not known to Hafiz and Attar, but I'm sure that if they could read it in English or was translated to Persian, they would say this is a Sufi text, right? If you look at Nezami's Layla and Majnun, what an ambiguous text.
Mm.
It seems to be a love story, and yet you could quite easily break that text up and do a Sufi commentary on it, and it would seem to be the most Sufi commentary that is in the Mazhab Eshq style.
Yes.
So that's the number one thing is the connection to the idea of the Mazhab Eshq, wherein love is a transformative
Mm.
experience. That's such an important part of Attar's poetry that I would say if you miss that, you've missed the whole thing.
Okay.
If you've missed that, the train has passed you. There is no Attar for you. He's gone, right? Um, so, um, but there's more.
Okay.
There
Good.
is more,
Good.
and one thing you might have noticed is I see these two words, religion and love, as
Mm.
balancing one another.
Okay.
See, the quote you mentioned,
Mm.
right? What we talk about today is love, and tomorrow we do the same. I
Yeah.
messed it up, but more or less though.
No, that's
Um,
it.
yeah. So there's a way that someone could take that quote and say to themselves, "Well, you see, all that matters is love."
Mm.
And so, away with the Zahid. And by the way, we're practically quoting Hafez
Yeah.
and Attar when we say away with the Zahid.
Yeah.
And forget fasting and forget prayer and forget all this stuff. Give me the wine and the beloved, and that's all I need. And by the way, this theme appears over and over again.
Yeah.
I think there's sort of these different sort of tendencies to read the literature that miss the idea.
Mm.
One is to take that part too seriously
Yep.
and too literally, and to say that somehow Attar was not interested in piety. It was hard. It would be a hard thing to say with Attar. It's much easier to say with Hafiz. Or to take it the other way and to say that the love is completely metaphorical when they talk about beloveds and the shahid and all this. It's just it's all just code for God and all that. These are actually extreme views that don't fit the literature. Religion of love, these two are balanced.
Hmm.
You need the discipline, sobriety, the self-control and self-mastery that the deen, which is how I'm translating religion, the deen of, according to Attar, Islam offers,
Hmm.
uh, before you can really delve into the depths of what eshq has to offer, what love has to offer.
Hmm.
Um, Without, you could have the experience of love and have the transformation, but you certainly wouldn't know what to do with it, where to go with it, without Dean to sort of shape that experience, right? And so that's why if you look at the book, there's three segments.
Yes.
There's religion, love, union.
Yes.
I see that as being the three major themes of Attar's writings.
Right.
That's why I named it Religion of Love.
Well, that certainly makes excellent sense to me, and I did like the way that you laid it out in the book, in that those three
Thank you.
sections that you mentioned, and they are the three sort of pillars, if you like, of understanding Attar's relationship with this concept love in the context of um, the Islamic religion and, of course, the Sufi tradition. I'm curious about this a little bit more, if you don't mind. Like what you say about the balance is absolutely essential, and I agree with you 100%. And taking love too seriously on its own, or taking or diminishing it, also is a mistake. Um, there is a kind of futility, I suppose, if you just take love on its own. So because what is it becomes an end in itself without the current of religion, if you like, that's for moving it and shaping it and directing it to something, to a purpose, if you like, a higher purpose. So so we'll get to, I guess I'm sort of edging towards the question of union. And what I found fascinating in Sufi literature and Sufi thought um, obviously pertains to the concept of union. I think this is a profound notion in Sufism, and sometimes I feel like it's an odd one. So I'll try and explain this a little bit. So I feel like
Hmm.
it's profound and beautiful and absolutely essential, but at the same time I find it a little bit odd. And the reason for that is because there is um, sometimes a conflation or a confusion with another word similar to it, unity. Um, a central concept in Islamic teaching, which is generally in Arabic, tawhid. We translate tawhid sometimes. I mean, generally, typically, as unity. Maybe that's not the best way to translate it. And as I understand it, it's at least distinctive from union, and is more about the theological position of Islam as a strict monotheism, that is tawhid. Um, so union and unity sort of stand apart in a little bit, sort of, if you like. They stand on their own terms. So given this, Attar's system of attaining union is what I'm really interested in, and I'm hoping that you can expound on this a little bit more. Um, so would you mind please explaining this technical word for us, this union, in Sufi terminology, in Attar's language in particular? Um, yeah, is that does that fair? Is that
Yeah,
fair?
it's very fair. It's very fair. I know that that's a shared interest of ours, right? I know you do a lot of work on ontology and thinking about Sufism in philosophical terms.
Yes.
Um, with Attar, what's interesting is how much he pushes back against, um, you know, uh, over intellectualizing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I think that's a part of it for him,
Mm.
and I think I could explain why and get to this
Okay.
point of union that and we might both appreciate.
Great.
So union is it's the end of the journey, to some degree.
Okay.
I say to some degree because whenever he gets there in his text, it's not like the text is over.
Right.
Then he'll start to talk about the complexities and the back and forth. And he'll start to talk about, there's the fana and baqa at the same time, right? There's the annihilation and remaining at the same time.
Yes.
So we'll say for now it's the end goal, but it's not an end goal that a person is just done. There's still more work after that.
Right.
And, uh, you know, you'll start to notice that everything that Attar talks about leads to that. So let's take, for example, Attar has a great interest in people who are outcasts.
Mm.
And, well, who better than Halaj, right?
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's people who are hated for their love of God. Um, he has an interest in people who are simple. And simple is a really difficult term because it almost seems like a dismissal. But I mean, they take a simple approach to religion, a non intellectual approach. The Din al Aja is the religion of old women, right? The simple approach to religion, where it's this very personal relationship with God, and you leave aside over intellectualizing about that. That's a common theme in what he's saying.
Yes.
What do these have in common? Well, what they have in common is a very careful attention to the self and the avoiding aggrandizing, making the self larger and bigger and more powerful, right?
Yes.
If you're hated by others because of your love,
Yes.
then you've deflated the ego. And if you've avoided asserting yourself as an intellectual and overthinking things, he says, why ask why? What are you
Yeah.
going to get? The only answer you're going to get is something that's not true, because you can't ultimately understand reality,
That's
right?
right.
So so the first thing to understand is that you have to get over yourself.
Mm.
For Attar, that's one step to union. Because what lies at the end is yourself, but it's a self that you can only know
Mm.
by unknowing the self that you've built up throughout your whole life,
Yeah.
right? There is a self that's hidden in yourself, but you're not going to meet that self until way down, until you've gotten rid of everything. And it's a painful process. Seven valleys, right? He says when he describes the birds on the journey, I
Yeah.
mean, they're emaciated, they're sick, some have died,
Yeah.
right? Some, there was a way where I read one bait and it wasn't clear to me if the bird had actually committed suicide
Yeah.
or been murdered. But in
That's
either case, it's an ugly journey, right? To
yes.
get to the Simor, to that oneness.
Yes.
Um, so that's the first thing. So union, in a way, is a reality that was always present. It's not something that's somehow very elusive or evasive. It's the most obvious thing there is.
Yes.
It's just that walls of ego have been built up and have to be brought down,
Right.
and that's one part of the journey. And so first you have to know to seek it,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And it's the first step is talab, it's quest, right?
Yes.
Seeking it out, going after it. Um, and then you have to start the process of unknowing what you've known.
Right.
And then there has to be a stage where you desire the beloved more than you desire yourself, right? And so again, you're going over yourself. This is really the religion of love, right?
Mm.
It reminds me of what, if you think about the way John Hick defines religion, he
Mm.
says that, I paraphrase, but he says
Yeah.
that basically religion is at its core, a means to get from selfishness to selflessness, right? And all of that is union. And one important thing, and I'll end on this because I don't want to just go on and on, but
Mhm.
one important part of that is a shift in terms of knowledge.
Yeah.
And Attar calls this jam,
Mhm.
where all the faculties, everything comes together and you realize oneness and union.
Mm.
For that to happen again, it involves avoiding anything that causes division. And if you think about it, all definitions which are needed for philosophy, all differentiation which is needed for rational arguments, right?
Mm.
All of that goes against jam.
Okay.
Jam is the ability to see the oneness behind everything.
Mm.
Nothing gets in the way of that more
Mm.
than trying to assert yourself and
Mm.
make some sort of argument based on things being divided and categorized, because the categories have to fall away.
Yeah. 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 Wow. I tremendously appreciate that
Yeah.
explanation. Just a small follow-up on that, though, is when we use the word union, is there a particular term in Persian or Arabic that's repeatedly used by Attal?
Yeah, you see a lot of them. So okay, I use it as a catch-all for
Yep.
a number of them, right?
Yep.
So to get to union, you have tajrid, tafrid. These are some that come up in his poetry, right? Tajrid, tafrid, toheed. There you
Yep.
go. There's one that comes up, visal,
Yep.
the attainment, visal, and those come up too. And then they'll usually be centered around in language of fana.
Right.
Now, fana is not union,
Mm.
right? It's before union. It's the
Yeah.
annihilation that occurs before union. But all of these together, if you take all the terminology surrounding, right, uh, taking your not jam too, I mentioned
Yeah. Yeah.
jam, tajrid, tafrid, tawheed, visal, fana. You put them right,
Yep.
you'll see that that this really adds up to union.
Is the word ittihad significant at all?
Ittihad is classically what it isn't. What I mean, that's a so hulul and ittihad are the two. So when it comes to discussions of union and Sufism, those are the two
Problematic terms.
controversial,
Yeah.
problematic terms. Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So of course, Hallaj was accused of hulul, incarnation.
Yes. Yes.
It should be hulul would be where God, where you have
Mm.
with hulul you have like God is occupying a body, and
Mm.
in ittihad you have God and the human soul both sharing right
Mm.
one body.
Mhm, mhm,
But
mhm.
where what fana classically is neither hulul nor ittihad, in that it's really a realization of the reality that was always there, an undoing of the falseness of self.
So yeah, the absence of self, I gather, is the essential component of what union comprises. Whereas Ittihad and Hulul indicate or insinuate that there's a sense of self still there, present to some extent, whether
Yes.
merging or mixing with the other. Um, a, s- a tiny other follow-up,
Yeah, sure,
if
sure,
I may.
sure.
So is it then that Attar is how should I put this? In your view, is he then predominantly using the word tawhid, but using it for the notion of union rather than anything else? So he's what should we say? Appropriating, assimilating, utilizing this term for his sort of higher concept of that end goal.
Um, he's drawing from a tradition
Mhm.
that contemplated Tawheed to its utmost.
Right.
And so, um, like for example, if you take here's a great example. If you take the works of Khaja Abdullah Ansari of
Ansari.
Herat,
Yeah.
right? Um, you know, the Manazil al-Sa'irin
Yeah.
has 100 manazil way stations.
Yep.
The last of them is is Tawheed. That's not really actually a manzila. That's not really a manzila.
Yeah.
That's that's actually beyond him. So there's really
Yeah.
99. I mean, he talks about the last one, but the
Yeah.
last one is so beyond a person. Yeah, now, obviously, these are all affecting Attar,
Yep.
right? But he's not the sort of person to get caught up, though sometimes he will. He'll mention Tajrid, he'll
Yeah.
mention Tafrid, he'll mention these terms, but he's not the type of person to get caught up in terms and
Right.
to say this is this or this is that. In
Right.
fact, his poetry doesn't really lend itself to like the same sort of, I would say, like, almost philosophical analysis that, let's say, the Gulshan Araz, right?
Mm, mm.
That you could do there, like
Yeah.
Shabastari's Gulshan Araz, for example. Um, or even what you might find in much like, well, not much later, really, a century later, in Fakhr Iraqi, Fakhruddin
Yeah.
Iraqi's Lamat. You're not going to see that same
Yeah.
sort of attention to detail,
Right.
because he wants to take the whole experience and sort of offer it to you. And very often it's through stories or metaphors.
Yep.
And so if you think about it, the two metaphors that I think have lingered the longest in terms of Attar's legacy, in terms of Attar's legacy for allegorical storytelling, are of course the Simur,
Mm.
being the phoenix or the Simur, the great bird that lives in Mount Qaf, and the 30 birds who realize that they are the Simur. Right?
Yes.
That's a kind of union
Yes.
um, that occurs at the end of the story, or at the end of the Musibat Nameh,
Yes.
the book of affliction, the wayfarer's drowning himself, or really immersing himself into the sea of the spirit,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's more Attar style, though terms do definitely come up in
Mm.
the process.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so the gist of it is basically it's for Attar, it's not really a sort of like a a theology of a kind of, distinctions to be able to put categories in place in relation to other and defining particularly one word and as this or that and sort of building a system. So he's not a system builder in a sense. He's working more holistically, and perhaps trying to communicate a kind of experiential understanding that arises from this kind of balance of religion and love that we talked about, that you
Hmm.
so correctly outlined. Um, so I guess this kind of, issue that I've kind of brought up unfairly, I guess, this distinction between union and unity is kind of, he would probably just laugh at me and go, "All right, that's enough. I'm done for tonight.
No,
Let's talk about
no.
love."
No, I think actually it's a really fair, it's a really great distinction, and it's something we could think more about.
Mm,
And I'm sure Attar's poetic corpus is so rich
mm,
that
mm.
if we were to go through it, I
Yeah,
actually think we could build more
right.
on this distinction and thinking about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, just to clarify,
Mm,
okay, so the way that I was studying Attar is I wanted to make I wanted to say something that was conversant with theories in religious studies.
yes, yes.
That was kind of the objective of the book,
Yeah.
right? So because this term union is used in the study of experience, religious experience, I went ahead with that term.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you sacrifice in the process when you do that is, of course, the kind of precision that we get in a lot of um, Sufi studies, Islamic studies, writings where we stick with the text. This is an article about fana, and that's great to write an article about fana. And even let's say to avoid translating it as annihilation, let's just call it fana. That's a useful thing in certain contexts.
Yeah.
But there will come a day, usually, where the person says, okay, great. Now I have to take that idea
Mm,
and I have to put it in conversation with all these other people who are thinking about, analogous ideas in other religious traditions.
mm,
How do I do that? Right. There are people who shy away from those shared terms. Like, for example, they don't like the word mysticism.
mm,
And mysticism is an abused term, and
mm,
it can be a sometimes meaningless term.
mm,
But in the right context, actually, it's a very useful term to think about certain ideas. If you
mm,
start to look at trends in, for example, medieval European thought, you do see that there are the Illuminationists who lean in what we would call a mystical model of model of knowledge, and there are those like the scholastics who don't and who have a model that you could call based on discursive reasoning, a rationalist model, right? That's not completely foreign to another tradition happening at the same time in Western and Central Asia, the Islamic tradition. There's something going on there that if we start to share terms
mm,
and give each other warnings that these aren't perfect terms, we can create a kind of back and forth and
mm.
conversation. You get what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it was what you just said about what you said about the religious studies context that piqued my interest in particular. And I'm sort of I guess I would define myself more along the lines of the field of religious studies. And so for me, Sufism has always been a sort of an endeavor to understand a phenomenon that is within the context of religious studies, that is in relation to other religions. So how do we understand Sufism, not just on its own terms, which is essential, but also how do we understand it in the sort of constellation of religions that exist in the geography that we find Sufism. And of course, from its initial birth to the present time, Sufism is an ongoing tradition, a living tradition, and it's incredibly diverse now, and it's global, if you like, to use a catchphrase. It's almost uh, infused in every way of thinking within the framework of Islamic world view. So it's a beautiful tradition that has sort of done quite a lot. Um, but of course, we're sort of shrinking the galaxy now and thinking about a very specific, time and place and figure. And this is always a nice way to get at maybe some more interesting issues and problematics. So in view of that, I want to kind of get to the crux of a question I have, and it's something that's been sort of um, with me ever since I started reading Attar. And and I wanted to share this with you so as just really to have a conversation and hopefully um, hear what you have to say and learn from your experience. Um, so if you forgive me, I'll do this in a roundabout way, in a long-winded. It's kind of a long-winded question. I'll lead into it. So apologies in advance to everyone and to you as well, dear Cyrus. So as we're conversing and I'm thinking about this, I wonder whether union is really, because you've alluded to this already, whether or not it's an attainable goal in the writings of Attar, in the imagination of Attar, and his sort of thinking. And and I'm obviously thinking also, as you mentioned, about the Musibat Nameh, about Mantiq al-Tayr, the Conference of the Birds, where Attar in particular has this kind of, in both really, but maybe Mantiq al-Tayr is a better example, where he has an ambiguous ending, where the reader can't quite tell, what's actually happened, whether there's more to come, as you've said. And I wonder whether Attar hadn't. So this is kind of a cheeky question. I wonder whether Attar hadn't made up his mind about this either, about the fact that union, which is union with God in essence, is something attainable in this world or something that's to be attained in the next world. This kind of interesting debate, and I know I'm making it a little bit more philosophical than it needs to be, um, or it's something that it just comes upon death, like the end of the physical mortal body. So, and I say this because um, it seems to me that his description. Now, this is where the religious studies thing comes in. So forgive me again for embellishing this a little bit. It comes in. It seems to me a bit that his description has a certain sense of um, a Buddhistic demeanor, in that, as you describe so well in your book, and you also alluded to it just now. The soul must first. So in your book, you say the soul must first construct an I-ness, a mani, as we say in Persian, and then through the burning of love. I'm sort of paraphrasing you here, so forgive me. Through the burning of love, this very construction must then be destroyed, obliterated, annihilated, fana, in the way of God, or on the way to God, to then liberate the soul from this very I-ness and its association also with perhaps we-ness, mai. But of course, this is hugely problematic in terms of, let's just say, comparisons with Buddhism, even if purely on the basis of translating, the core Buddhist doctrine of anatma, anatta and anatman. So atma and anatta, the self, the non-self in Buddhism. Um, I think in Buddhism it's generally translated as no self or non-self, which works well with Attar's explanation, and which might explain my observation because of this destruction of the I-ness. So Buddhism sticks to this idea that there is a no self, right? And selfhood is an illusion, is initially this illusion that you have to get past. And I'm thinking also of what you said earlier in terms of also this concept of Atman, the small self, and Brahman, the bigger self in the Hindu tradition, as a bigger scope in which you might find the same idea, but in an older situation, being put to the reader when you read Vedanta, Vedantic philosophy, or the Rig Vedas, for instance. Um, so I wonder whether you have any thoughts on this in terms of Attar's thinking about how and when union was to be attained. The other, if I may, the other semblance, if you like, a lot of this language has in relation in Sufism is with concepts that exist in Christianity, in the Christian tradition. Um, Obviously, union is important there. And there's a whole complex theology there, obviously, that is hugely problematic for the Muslim worldview, the Muslim understanding. But in essence, there is semblances and similarities that come across that sort of to the religious studies scholar is unavoidable, where we talk about union. And in particular, this is being the crux of my question is that, and in particular, how it's attained and sort of philosophically speaking, what's meant to happen, in this time or afterwards, or so on. So apologies about the long question. The point I think is, yeah,
Such a
please.
such a great question. I mean, you're really getting at the heart of the some of the most difficult questions um, in in theoretical Sufism,
Right.
and I've grappled with them myself more in the study of Ibn Arabi
Right. Yep.
um,
Yes.
and Fakhruddin Iraqi,
Yes.
only because Attar, I mean, you're right, it's there.
Mm.
It's there. The question is there.
Mm.
Um, but, with Ibn Arabi, he spells it out more. He spells out the problem more. So he talks about,
Yes.
like, he talks about the difference of the kinds of experiences you can have while embodied versus after death and how they're different, right? So because he's so explicit about it, it helped me at least make sense of things.
Yes.
But I wanted to go to something else because after I mean, go to a passage actually, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
The the reason being, so after I had finished the book, um, I kept going with Attar, and there were a few articles that came out, a few book chapters for other people and things like that.
Yeah.
And so in one of them, I had the opportunity to explore the conclusion to the Mental Attar, the speech of the birds. Okay,
Mm.
so I wanted to read, I'll just read
Please.
a short passage, and I think it'll give us a nice
Yeah.
something to work with to talk about
Perfect.
your really beautiful question.
Thank
Okay,
you.
and it starts with I'll just read the first bait in Persian. Man ke na man mande am na ghair man bartar as aql shar o khair man. Okay, so that's if you want to find it in your Persian editions, that's where this passage starts in the Mental Attar, and I'll read the English translation.
Yes.
As for me, I'm no longer me, nor not me. My evil and good transcend the intellect. I
Mm.
got lost all at once in my own self. There's no way out for me now but to be wayless.
Mm.
After poverty's rays shined upon me, both of the two worlds appeared in one skylight. Upon seeing the gleam of that sun, I myself remained. Water returned to water. All that I'd won and lost from time to time, I dumped into that water so blackish. I was erased. I was lost. Nothing left of me. I lingered as a shadow. Of me, not one twirling atom remained. I was a drop that became lost in the sea of secrets. Now I can no longer locate that single water drop. Who in this world, from the deep sea fish to the moon on high, wouldn't prefer being lost from this habitation? Now, the reason why, to me, this meant so much, why
Mm.
it hit me so hard, other than the fact that it's stunningly beautiful, right?
And beautiful
And
translation.
well, thank you. But the translation, I mean, doesn't come close to Attar is just, it'll blow you out of the water. So is the thing that really got to me about it is when you read Attar, he's very guarded. And
Mm,
if he speaks about himself, he does it in the Malamati way.
mm,
If those who know the tradition of the Malamatiya, it's something that had died out by Attar's time, but the ethos had remained, and
yes.
it's a way of self blame.
Yeah.
So if he speaks about himself, it's always in a disparaging way. Oh, me, I'm nothing.
Mm,
Me, I'm not this. I'm not fit to be this. I'm not an alim. I'm not. And yet, if you look, sometimes you'll catch him telling you that, actually, let me just tell you, disclosing something about himself and about his spiritual achievement. Okay. So what he's saying here is he's saying, I've been there, right?
yeah.
Now, is this the ultimate union that occurs after death or not? Your question still remains an excellent question, unanswered to some degree. But I think you begin to see what union at least is in this life for Attar,
Mm,
right? Um, my evil and good transcend the intellect, right? This is part of the problem that occurs when you realize that Hameust, he's
mm,
everywhere. Everything is him, right? Um, it the normal definitions and categories that people live by, you start to see their constructedness, and yet you also see their usefulness too. So
right.
he wants to maintain them, but also he can see past them.
Yeah.
And he's beginning he talks about water returning to water and how he realizes he sees water, but then he looks at the water drop and the water drop itself disappears. And he ends by telling us, like, if you look at the world around you and you really think about it and you start to see how ephemeral it is, and really, I mean, this is where Kermani's work is so useful.
Yeah.
I mean, how miserable life was in Nishapur too. I mean, that's got to be a part of this too. At that
Yes.
time,
Yes.
um, you could say, who in this world wouldn't prefer being lost from this habitation?
Mm,
Like, wouldn't it be great to disappear? So, the thing that's the kind of the beauty of Attar
mm,
is that instead of giving you a theoretical answer, which I'm sure, again, just because I haven't found it yet, the theoretical answer. I'm sure it's there. I'm not saying it's not there.
mm,
But for the most part, in his writing, instead of giving you like the theory, he gives you the experience.
mm,
And he
mm.
says, look, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
If you want to know what it feels like, this is what it feels like. You're going to feel lost. You're
Yeah.
going to feel erased. You're going to feel, I mean, he even talks about there's a kind of melancholy that occurs, right?
Yeah.
You're, um, but then at the same time, you're going to feel free. You're
Mm,
going to feel that you found what you were searching for the whole time.
mm,
So there's this thing of contradictions. My sense is that one of the big things that, of course, happens is when you're actually free from this world
mm.
in a more complete sense, which is what happens after death, right? I think that's the more blissful part, kind of union,
Okay.
and fana that's of course going to occur, right?
Right. Right.
Because at the same time it's fana and baqa, you're still here, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
still living through God's attributes right here.
Mm,
Um, and it is incomplete in that sense. And maybe that's where some of the sadness of his of Attar's union comes
yeah.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. That isn't really insightful response
Thank you.
because there is Uh, I think it was cheeky. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to sort of imply that Attard sort of didn't know. I think if anyone knew, he had a very good sense of what it was. But perhaps this sort of being his Socratic wisdom, in that what is there to say about it, really? There is this kind of sense in Attard, then, as you're saying. So I'm just kind of feeding this back, sort of like a just summarizing what you've just said, if I understand correctly, there is this kind of obviously experiential fana and baga in the process of practicing Sufi tradition, um, being on the Rah, the Tariqat, but at the same time, this, I guess, to Attab, quite significantly, is not something that is the whole story. That there is this there's still this humility must be maintained by the mystic or the Sufi, if you like. Um, and this humility is fundamental to that ultimate, that final, I guess, dropping of the curtain, which might be death. And it's provocative, because reading Attar kind of always teases you, with this idea that, what is it? Are we done? No, not yet. There's still the next one. When is it over? When does it end?
Yeah.
And
I
that,
mean, just to pick up
mm,
on that,
yeah,
well,
go.
if you don't mind, I just want, I mean, that's to me
Mm,
something that if I had had more time,
mm,
and maybe I'll have to explore this separately, I would have loved to explore more,
yeah.
which is, and you alluded to it. So it's the idea that, we like in virtue ethics, you differentiate between the intellectual virtues and the practical virtues, and
Yes.
there's virtues of learning and theory that take you. But what's fascinating to me in Attar is that the practical virtues, especially humility, is the primary means to knowledge.
Mm,
And to me, that's a real difference.
mm,
For Attar, someone could know the secrets of the heavens and the earth
mm,
simply by putting into practice the core Islamic message of selfless submission to reality,
mm,
right?
mm,
So I think that's very interesting. It's not completely new.
right.
Imam Ghazali implies it,
Yeah.
and you see it in the works of others as well. But Attar expands on it, and he gives us much more, and he gives us a whole system of, look, if you keep at this and you keep chipping away
Mm,
at your ego, you'll also get knowledge.
yeah. 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 Great point. Um, it's so true. I mean, there's this. I suppose, as you say, there's a lot more to extract from Attar, and though he seems to be in some ways a limited thinker, in fact, he gives us an ocean. His texts are a sea of possibilities, um, and and it, and leaving us with that sort of silence is again, it's an invitation, perhaps, for any reader, most likely his own disciples or his own readership at the time or after him, let alone us now, several centuries now, separated from him, to investigate, to to dive into these issues, to enter into um, pondering about, reflecting on some of these things, but perhaps in a more meaningful way, not
Hmm.
just sort of rationalizing them,
Yes. Yes.
immersing
Because
ourselves. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
yeah,
Look, fundamentally what he's doing
mm,
is what the greatest artists in history have done. And that's what I think that's where you have to see Attar as an artist, which is
yeah, I
to
agree.
take the great ideas of your time. You don't even have to contribute new ideas. To take the great ideas of your time
Yeah,
and to present them in a way that stimulates the other person's imagination so much that you can say that they have entered your world or
yeah,
they have entered a new world,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Think
right.
about Shakespeare, right? I mean, Shakespeare is not giving you he's not creating new theories of much of anything.
Mm,
And yet, you can consider Shakespeare one of the world's great thinkers because he takes the sum of learning of his age and what he knows and presents it to you in using his imagination in a way that it's timeless and it's its own world. And
100%.
Attar does that.
Yeah.
Attar does that. He does that at a time that you could call the peak of classical Sufi thought.
Yes.
He's inherited the best that there was, other
Yes.
than of course the Ibn Arabi. I mean,
Yes.
maybe the best was yet to come, but the best that there are.
Debatable.
Yeah, yeah, debatable. But he's inherited so much, and instead of giving it to you as doctrine, instead of giving it to you as theory,
Mm,
he creates these narrative worlds.
mhm.
He creates them. He invites you to enter them, and you
Yeah.
can lose yourself in them.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
it is. I mean, it's a brilliance of its own.
Mm. I 100% agree.
Yeah, yeah,
In fact, I couldn't agree more,
yeah.
especially what you said about Attar being thought of or considered as an artist, and his work as a work of art,
Hmm.
um, of mystical, aesthetic, and meaningful. Not just for the superficiality of its beauty,
Hmm.
the prose or the poetry,
Hmm.
but obviously what it carries, what it becomes a vehicle of, that meaning, that truth, that depth, and then the possibility that it allows us to, again, be drawn into it and then transformed by it somehow. Depending, even in English. I mean, obviously not everyone's going to be able to read the Persian, but thankfully, for the work that a lot of our colleagues are doing, and I really loved your translation. Actually, just
Thank you.
what you cited, that was just beautiful. It was really beautiful. Um, so is essentially then this idea of unity, to sort of loop it back, um, to our theme of love. Religion of love and union are kind of like the recipe for Attar, or rather,
Hmm.
how would you put this? Religion of love is the recipe for union, or they are both the recipe in some kind of a formula.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's that you know, you love culminates in union.
Yeah.
Love culminates in union. That's true with or without religion, by the way,
Yep.
right? That's what the lover wants. Any lover wants to be one with their beloved.
Yeah.
This is, since we've brought up Ibn Arabi,
Yeah.
there's this beautiful passage where Ibn Arabi says that basically any two people, they lovers want to be, of course, conjoined in a certain way. But he says when two people are even engaged in conversation and they love each other, what are they trying to do? They're trying to use those words for the two of them to become one.
Mm.
Or when people embrace, all of it is aimed toward love. Is always aimed toward union. Okay, but the beautiful thing is that for Attar is the way that religion gives you a proper understanding so that you don't go toward a version of union that's false,
Mhm.
and where your that false selfhood, that false sense of ego is maintained. You don't want that to be maintained, right? And so religion gives you what we're calling the way
Yeah.
he calls it the way of Muhammad, or he'll call it the deen, or the
Yes.
way of Mustafa. He has all these different ways of referring to it,
Yes.
and of course the way of the awliya, the way of the Sufi saints. These give you a guidepost to do it in a way where instead of reaching a kind of a false beloved,
Mm.
you reach the real, pure, ultimate beloved, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So they all work together.
Yeah. Beautifully
Yeah,
put. Beautifully put. Um, I can't resist asking about one more thing, I think,
yeah,
if
sure,
I may, and if you're up for it.
of course.
Um, and it's in relation to what you just said and what we've been talking about. Um, you know, you kind of explained it so well in that, love, union, the right way, within a sort of, it's being grounded, it's being directed, not contained or controlled or crushed, but it's kind of like a river flowing to the sea. Cliche, apologies, but the image, everyone knows it. Um, but it kind of always raises the question, in the back of one's mind about, um, okay, so this is the Sufi way. What about other ways, right? But hold that thought for a second. Um, because in the world of, let's say, I know mysticism is a problematic term, but in the world of mysticism, in a way, the the experience transcends or goes beyond religion in a way. But that's problematic description. Obviously, I recognize that and needs to be sort of carefully unpacked and explained. But let me go to chapter 12 of your book. I really, really enjoyed this chapter. It's one of my favorite chapters of your book,
Thank you.
obviously, but beautifully written. But also because you brought to light this story that's been it's so famous. Everyone knows about it, talks about it. Sheikh of Sanaan, the story of the great Sheikh of Sanaan, and you brought this to light so beautifully. This timeless story. Not only as you put it, because um, it has a legacy that reaches further back in time, which was beautifully unpacked um, before Attar, but really because in a serious way it is a pivotal story that contains a seminal truth about the reality of the way, the path, with a capital W and capital P, and about this question of union and thus spiritual transformation beyond the formal perfecting of one's religious duties. Of course, again, this has many, I mean, I can't help but see Christian parallels here, and obviously this is pertinent to the story of the Sheikh of Sanaan, which hopefully we'll discuss in a minute. But in particular, what is fascinating is that the Christian and Christianity, as you point out, as a trope in the Muslim imagination, are once again front and center for this transformative story of the protagonist, the elderly Sufi master, the Sheikh of San'an. So, as we know, the object of his affection is the beautiful Christian girl whom he sees or spies on a balcony in Byzantium. Um, and he's driven to Byzantium, obviously, because of his this recurring dream, as you say in the book. And taking this dream as a sign, he makes his way into Byzantium from Muslim territories into Christian. And in a commendable way, he's not afraid to confront his destiny. I think this is a powerful point that you made. Um, Now, for those of us who know the story, spoiler warning, so forgive me, but he we know that the Sheikh already has a great number of disciples who really worship him as their ideal or idea of piety, and here he's about to surrender everything up, give everything up for the love of a Christian girl, right? Which is blasphemous for them, for his disciples. It's unheard of, unimaginable. Of course, I don't mean to make this sound demeaning or derogatory in any way about Christians or Christianity, but there is a hint. We're talking about the story, obviously, within the context of Attar's imagination, but there is a hint, or indeed a deliberate accusatory tone in Attar's story that Christianity and the Christian girl, as the representative of Christianity, um, is in a way um, problematic or problematized. And you so rightly point out that this is limited to Attar's imagination. And Attar probably, most likely, I think if I remember correctly, you say that he probably did not really engage with Christians of Nishapur. So his sort of understanding of Christianity is more or less fictional or imaginary, or what to his mind is the situation, or based on rumors or hearsay, right? So he's relying on tales and stories of what he's heard from Muslims about Byzantium. Christian land full of lustrous and wondrous things, as you say, a place really of temptation away from piety. So there are so many interesting parallels here for us to unpack and talk about. Um, but would you like to tell us a little bit more about this particular story? And the reason that I raise it is obviously for everything that we've talked about to this point, in the sense of love, unity. Um, yeah, does that
Oh yeah, there's
flow?
so much to say. I will say, I mean, look, suffice it to say
Mm,
that when I used to teach a course on, I used to teach an introduction to like Middle Eastern literature and film course, and
Beautiful.
I wanted to sneak in a little Attar. Like, if you give me one thing to sneak in, it's going to be this story.
Yeah, yeah,
I think if all you need, if all, like, let's say there's people even listening to this podcast and they've never read Attar before, they want to go, obviously the Mental the speech of the birds has been translated numerous times. There's a
yeah.
new translation. Vulpe, I think, is the
Yes,
translator's
Charlie
name.
Wolf.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, I think Peter Avery has a beautiful, beautiful translation. There's
Yeah.
there's translations there, and you don't have to read the whole thing if you don't have time. You can just, if you just read the Sheikh Hassan on story, in fact, you get sort of a lot of the main themes,
Yeah.
really, of Attar. There's more to Attar than that. It would be a shame,
Yes, of course.
Waran Haif, but
Yes.
uh, and you know what I would do when I would read, when I would I always had a lot of fun with the students with this one. And what I would do is I'd have them read it once on their own, and
Mhm.
I would bring them in and I would say, okay, what's the moral of this story? What's this story really about? And
Yep.
the reason why it was so fun for me is that they'd always get it wrong.
Yeah,
And they would always think that it was the story of a sheikh who had lost his religion,
that's right.
and things got really bad. But then he was saved by an intercession of the prophet through a
Yeah.
dream, and he repented. And it was a story of repentance, right? Someone becomes a sinner and then they become good. Pretty straightforward, right? Now, then I would point out to them, well, look, this title is in the manuscript where it says, to lose. I think I can't remember the exact wording, but like to lose your religion for love is to gain all. I'm like, well,
Mm.
come on, like clearly something else is going on here. And I would have them read it out loud, and what they would realize, and I think when anyone who reads this passage realizes, is that actually what Attar is really saying is in the dramatization. Right? When the sheikh stands before his students and his students are trying to get him to come back to Mecca and to leave this evil Byzantium, right? When they're trying, they're trying to talk some sense into him, right? The sheikh's responses are the religion of love. So they'll say,
Mhm.
why don't you come back to the Kaaba? And and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember it
Yeah,
exactly, but he
please.
says, where is my, why don't you come back to the Kaaba and do prostrations? He says, yeah, where is my idol so I can do prostrations before her,
Yeah.
right? Or they say, don't you miss Islam? Don't you miss Islam even for a second? And he says, the only thing I regret is that I didn't fall in love earlier, you know? So my only regret, he's like, I've repented from being a sheikh. I'm done with that,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And you begin to realize, oh, this is a very powerful narrative. And to me, the most interesting thing is everything that my students noticed and
Mm.
everything that you see about quote unquote Christianity as it's represented in the story,
Yeah,
it's coming from Attar sources.
yeah,
So if you read the original, it is what the story that my students thought it was. It's the story of a sheikh who almost lost his religion completely, right?
yeah.
And the Christians in that version are like, evil, and it's the time of the Fourth Crusades, and in fact, in his source, it's a call to fight the Crusaders that ends that story.
Right.
But what Attar does with it, and this is what I said, this is why I said it before, this is the artist. You see, the artist can take a story that everyone knows or a story it means something somewhere else, bring it into his world and say, no, no, no. That was just a bowl of apples. But look, when I do it, it's something
Mm.
completely different, right? That was just a girl on a bench. But when I do it, it's something completely different,
Yeah,
right? He takes this story of the Sheikh San'an, which to him is a historical story,
yeah.
and he turns it into a powerfully convincing case that even when you are the most achieved sheikh of your age, there's one more idol left for you to destroy. And nothing will help you destroy it more than being annihilated in
Mm.
love.
Mm.
Because love will tear you down, love will break your heart, and it'll break your spirits. And that's what you need,
Yeah.
right? And to do it poetically through this story is what makes the story so powerful.
Mm.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful
I
story.
love it. Yeah.
And I find myself going back to it over and over again. So like recently I've been thinking of, wow, I just picked up on something that I never picked up on before, which is in Attar's poetry,
Yeah.
the Zahed and the people that he's Zahed meaning, I know you know, but just in case someone,
Yeah.
I'm going to translate everything so everybody
Please,
knows.
please.
The world renouncer, or
Yeah.
the ascetic, right?
Please. Yeah.
Um, the a Zahed, an ascetic, a pietistic person, which is the worst of people in Attar's poetry, um, is fundamentally caught up in categories and in keeping the world, in keeping distinctions and keeping things pure.
Yeah.
Now look at the story, right? He is literally immersed in hog feces, right? When he becomes this, the when he is taking care of her pigs for a year
Yeah.
as part of the dowry,
That's
right?
right.
The story breaks down categories
Mm.
and the worldview of the ascetics so beautifully.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a powerful story. There are many other like it in Attar's
Mm.
corpus, but I think that it's really done so beautifully there that
Yeah.
I think even he was aware that he had really
Oh,
done a beautiful job,
yeah,
because he
yeah,
makes it the climactic. He makes such an important point in the
yeah.
Mentical tear.
Yep,
Yeah,
it's a Statue of David moment.
yeah,
I
yeah,
hope people in Florence may forgive me if they don't like this comparison, but
yeah,
yeah, I think it's a mastery. It's masterful. Uh,
yeah,
what he does with this story and what he brings out in it. And of course, terrible things happen to the Sheikh in the story,
yeah.
and unimaginable things in the from the Islamic point of view, like renouncing the Quran, looking after pigs, etc., etc. Um, and this is something for me as well. It's just stuck with me, and I just can't, I go back to it over and over again. The story of the Sheikh of Sanaan, and it has this powerful point, as you say. I mean, what he does with it is incredible. Um, and the ending is, of course, essential here to remember, despite all of the things that the Sheikh goes through, and the destruction of his sort of final barrier, this his final portion of his ego, um, brings him to the point of reliance on God, reliance on the Prophet, rather than his own effort. So here, faith and grace. I know these are Christian. I'm borrowing from St. Paul's letters, I believe. Faith and grace as being, I guess, in Attar's mind too, vis-a-vis this story, um, fundamental to one's salvation. Mhm. And this still blows my mind every time I think about this story, right? Because the girl in the end is converted too, by way of
Yes,
her own
exactly. Yeah.
uh, realization of everything she's done, and then the
Through the
sheikh.
Sheikh.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. She realizes the Sheikh as a waliullah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And he sets her aflame.
yeah,
Um, it's a just such a beautiful story that in the way Attar does it. And then of course, um, you can see the result that he wants it to have on his audience because of the result that it has in the Mantiq Tear. The
mm,
result that it has in the Mantiq Tear is that it finally convinces these birds who are reluctant to leave the things they love
mm,
to seek the Seymour. That's the motivator, right? That's the motivating story. That's what finally convinces them. Okay, right? The nightingale will leave the rose, right?
yeah,
The parrot will leave paradise. They're all going to leave all the things that they
love,
love
yeah,
because they've been inspired by this Sheikh Hassan on story. So you can see this is the objective that Attar has for us.
right,
He's hoping that it will awaken within us
mm,
a desire to take the risk, as you said, to boldly venture forth,
mm,
as the Sheikh did when he went all the way from Mecca to
yeah.
the land of infidelity.
Mm.
Really, yeah.
There's a line from Mantarottel which I absolutely love, and perhaps I'm guilty of sometimes taking it out of context a little bit, but you know it. It's the one that goes, if I say it right, هر که را در عشق شد محکم قدم درگذشت از کفر و از اسلام هم. And this. I think it appears either in this story or just before it, um, perhaps maybe a few lines before it, or in it. I can't quite remember. But
I don't remember.
but in any case, it's kind of connected to this story in a significant way. I think we
Mhm.
might both agree in
Yes.
in in sort of distilling the idea. and what's about to come and what's about to happen. But none of that really means, I think, and it would be a mistake, as you said, to kind of take it out of that harmony which love and religion must ultimately find themselves in. And without that harmony, you have either just love for the sake of love or religion for the sake of formal religion, right? But
Mhm.
when they come together, they produce something, I can't help but say mystical,
Mhm. Yeah,
something
yeah.
magnificent, something beyond the realm of intelligence and rationalization and yeah. What do
You
you,
know,
mm,
that's where I think it helps.
mm,
You and I can understand these things in context,
mm,
but I think if someone were coming to Attar fresh
yeah,
and they said, "Well, what's the context of something like that?"
yeah,
This the beautiful bait that you said that
mm,
going beyond Islam and going
yeah,
beyond the division between Islam and Kufr and going eh, eh, because it can lead to a kind of confusion,
yeah,
much like when people, the famous lines of Ibn Arabi, that my heart has been a
yeah,
church, a synagogue. You know,
yeah.
if you have to understand the context, and I think the first place to understand the context, if you don't start anywhere else, is go to Tazkiratul Awliya, the Memorial of Saints, and read the chapter on Halaj.
Oh, yeah,
Why? This
yeah,
is a Halajian mode of Islam that Attar is in, right?
yeah,
Halaj has a beautiful defense of Pharaoh, of Iblis,
yes,
right?
yeah,
He sees himself as following their path, but it's interesting because he also praises Muhammad.
mm.
So what's going on? He's not like a Satanist.
No, of course
Why
not.
is he using? Why is he using? Right? Why is he so interested in in these diabolical sort of anti-heroic figures?
Yeah,
Right? Again, this it's a dialectic.
mm.
Islam is a dialectic, and when Muslims become obsessed with their laws and their categories and their black and white view of the universe, they miss the forest for the trees. They miss the reality of love that's beneath them.
Yeah,
Right. This is a time when the anti-hero is needed.
mm.
Right. This is a time when you can reimagine the symbols.
Mm.
Well, look at Iblis, right? Isn't there a way that you can look at Iblis and see him as being the ultimate, rebel who chooses infamy because of his love,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's a beautiful literary symbol. Halaj just seems to be the one who came up with it, right? It's
mm.
an amazing literary symbol to
Mm.
take Iblis and do that with him. So Attar is working from that tradition. And if you know the tradition, then none of this strikes you as unusual. And if you don't know the tradition, then it's new, and you
Yeah,
you have to be exposed to it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly right. And the whole point, um, and if I sort of bring it back to your book again, it's it does such a great job of contextualizing all this so that when you come across these passages, come across these ideas, these concepts, you understand how they sit within the Sufi tradition and then within the broader Islamic uh, worldview. And then they have these kind of currents, these kind of um, lines that lead through specific figures back to the beginning, right? And so that will always help, keep the use of these concepts and these phrases and passages in the right way, in the right view,
Mm-hmm.
without
Mm-hmm.
losing sight of that and without losing them to unnecessary confusion. So I think that's that's a beautiful way to put it. Um, I love the way you ended the book,
Thank you.
and that you brought up the imagery of the turquoise stone, the nativity, the nativeness of the the spirituality of Attar to the land in a way, to the place, to the context, um, and and the saints that sort of precede him, that go back, that stand before him, that sort of he's standing on their shoulders in a way, that he's moving forward on their grace, if you like. And it just had this formidable final sort of touch about about the message of love, the religion of love, and life and spirituality, which I think life I can't conceive of life, let alone spirituality, without love. If I There's a romantic in me, which is quite a hopeless statement, and I apologize, another cliche, but it's it seems that it's such a significant aspect of spirituality, mysticism, even asceticism. I mean, the extent to which Zahids go to maybe suffering for their beloved is an expression of love that they have, and that hope and aspiration for union.
Yeah. Yeah. Sanai says the heart that's not in love is not alive. Yeah.
Beautiful,
Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful. Well, I think that's a great place to end on.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been really lovely.
I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you for being here, Dr. Professor Cyrus Zargar of University of Central Florida. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
It's
Thank you
been
for having me.
beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.